Welcome. I'm John A. Warnick, founder of the Purposeful Planning Institute. We're excited you're joining us for a PPI Thought Leader and Industry Innovator webinar. I hope you agree with the mindset of the PPI community that our best days lie just ahead of us. To get to where we want to go, we must cultivate a beginner's mind and pursue the path of mastery, not just expertise. Our PPI Thought Leader and Industry Innovator webinars help illuminate more meaningful and powerful ways in which we serve and can grow our practices. Each webinar helps us connect, engage, learn, and inspire. If you've not already taken the bold step of joining the Purposeful Planning Institute, we hope you'll do so soon. Visit our website for additional information. And for you, our guests, and for all the incredibly talented and compassionate members of the PPI community, we remind you these recordings are intended for the use and benefit of our members and guests, and sharing webinar recordings and links without express permission from PPI is prohibited. Enjoy and thrive.
Our purposeful quote today is actually an excerpt from a purposeful poem, or a poem. So I'm actually going to read the whole part, but Julie, you can put up the initial part of the quote if you would. It's about observing without evaluating. And it says, I can handle your telling me what I did or didn't do, and I can handle your interpretations, but please don't mix the two. If you want to confuse any issue, I can tell you how to do it. Mix together what I do and how you react to it. Tell me that you're disappointed with the unfinished chores you see, but calling me irresponsible is no way to motivate me. And tell me that you're feeling hurt when I say no to your advances, but calling me a frigid man won't increase your chances. Yes, I can handle your telling me what I did or didn't do, and I can handle your interpretations, but please don't mix the two. And this is a poem from the book recommendation, Nonviolent Communication, by Dr. Marshall B. Rosenberg. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today, but I thought he did an exceptional and even entertaining job of differentiating the importance between what we see, those observations, and how it impacts us. And that's really going to be a big part of our conversation today.
Thank you, Melissa. That's a great quote, and it really does fit in so nicely with what you're going to be sharing with us. It is our tradition in these PPI Thought Leader and Industry Innovator webinars to ask our guest or guests if they would share their purposeful odyssey. Melissa, you and I talked about what you might do. You've shared purposeful odysseys many times before, but there's a special wrinkle I think you can put into your purposeful odyssey story you'll share today. But Renee, if you would be comfortable, you've been a member of this community for maybe 3 or 4 years or thereabouts. Time does fly, but I think it would be wonderful if you could kind of share the story of where you started professionally, how you became aware of PPI, and what the PPI community has meant to you over the last couple of years as you've begun to really get integrated into the community.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. My journey started about 7 years ago with several different influences. Really, I've been a certified financial planner, working in wealth management my entire career. But like I said, several influences came together to really start me thinking about the impact I was making with my clients, but even more importantly, with my own family. And as I was on this journey and met different people, Melissa is one who I met, And Melissa, along with others, had recommended the Purposeful Planning Institute. And I'm sorry to say it took me a couple of years to take them up on their recommendation. But the name kept coming up, and I was able to join, and such wonderful people that have been able to encourage me as my journey continued. So my focus in all that I've been learning, my personal purpose or sense of mission is to serve my own family first. I'm the oldest of eight. I have 7 siblings. I have 3 daughters, but I have 23 nieces and nephews. And so everything that I hear or read or listen to, I listen thinking, how can my family, my extended family, benefit from this? And then, of course, how can my clients, others in my life, benefit? So that's how I apply all that I learn, and it's been incredibly impactful on me personally and on my own family. Like last week's session with Dennis Jaffe, that book I shared with him. I was talking with a niece who writes a family newsletter, and she was so captivated by the idea of 5 capitals, but the emphasis on the non-financial ones, that she's been sharing what she's learned in the family newsletter. So things like that. So she's in her early 20s. So just being able to impact the next generation. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Renee. And I would say that I think our focus is on the clients we serve, but the reality is what we learn within PPI, what we aspire to do with the best practices that are shared within the PPI community. It would be tragic if we didn't apply that into our own family systems, right? So I just want to applaud what you're doing and share that I've had a similar experience when I really stepped back and tried to apply the work into my own family system. It's made a big difference in relationships within my own family, and that's been extremely positive. So I just want to affirm what you were sharing, the importance of what you were sharing there. Melissa, by saving you to be the second Purposeful Odyssey, it perhaps gives us a chance to really lead right into where we want to take off with this conversation today. So could you share your Purposeful Odyssey with us?
Absolutely. And I'm going to really start with how I got introduced to the tool that I'm going to share with folks today, Open the Front Door. Folks who've heard my full Purposeful Odyssey before will know I started as a CPA in estate planning and wealth management, and saw the complexity of family wealth and family business, and could not find in the late 90s, early 2000 anyone who I thought could help our families at that intersection, and also us as their advisors, to not only do well planning for the assets and protecting the assets, but to do well creating estate and financial plans that made sense for the people, the personalities, and the family dynamics. I eventually left my career in finance in 2003 to get a master's in psychology, to become one of those sorts of people that I wished our clients and our advisory team had. And when I started in May, that Maymester, summer 1 semester, I'm not sure exactly why I started with family dynamics, but the very first class I took in grad school was family dynamics. I think it was probably the only one or one of 2 options that were given that summer semester. But I will tell you, as a CPA from estate planning who jumped into a master's in psychology program with her first class being family dynamics, I jumped in to the deepest end that I possibly could, because we all know that individual psychology is complex, couples psychology is even more complex, and intergenerational family dynamics are extremely complex. But I will tell you, I'm very grateful that I jumped into that deep end for a lot of reasons. In being immersed in the family, application and theories of psychology, it confirmed that yes, I wanted to work at this intersection of family and business and wealth, and there were some resources out there that could help me to do that. My professor was actually is a practicing Bowenian psychologist, fortuitously. So I got, exposed well to Bowen theory. And somewhere in that course, this wasn't a tool that was in our books, but somewhere during that course, Dr. Lassiter shared with us this tool called Open the Front Door as a communication tool. And it stuck with me. It stuck with me and has been one of the tools that I've used the most consistently in that almost 20 years since. And while it's taught as a communication tool, one of the things that I've found is that it's equally helpful as a self-awareness tool. I'll share an example with you. I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago. She actually had a major surgery last week. And when I was talking to her a couple of weeks ago, she was so upset and hurt that when she had stopped by the family business and got into a conversation with some of the ladies at the front desk there about her upcoming surgery, they were asking about it. She said, and be sure on your calendars you have it marked that my husband is not going to be in that day. And the lady said, oh, he talked to us about that. He actually said he would be in. He's going to leave for a little while, but he'd be in for most of the day. And his wife was so hurt and upset. And I said, well, have you asked him for what you want? And she said, no, not exactly. And I said, well, what do you want? And she started talking about, well, it's a major surgery. I want him to be there with me. I want him to be there to support our son. But actually, I don't really need him before I go into surgery. And if he's just waiting around the house, he's going to be all nervous, and it's actually going to be easier if he's not around. So I just kind of paused and smiled and I said, so you are hurt and angry because your husband has not read your mind to anticipate what you want and enthusiastically offered to give it to you, but you don't even know what you want. What if we revisit Open the Front Door to help you get clarity of what you want so that then you can go back and talk to him? It was a helpful tool for her to go through. And again, we're going to unpack this tool for helpful self-awareness tool for her to go through and say, kind of on the one hand, or this part of me, thinks this and feels this and wants this. On the other part, on the other hand, a part of me thinks this and feels this and wants this. And for her to get clarity of what she wanted so that then she could give her husband the gift of clarity of her request and give him a chance to be there for her with this major surgery like she wanted him to be, instead of hoping that he would read her mind, get it correct, and enthusiastically say yes. So again, it's created as a communication tool, and it's actually created, I learned that it was created by a group called Learning Forum for school-age kids. So that excites me because it is so simple. The school-age kids can learn it, but I will tell you, it is so robust that adult after adult after adult, really benefits from it. But I love when we can get robust from simple, and that's one of the things this tool does.
Well, I'm going to just share a sneak preview. That was a great introduction, a powerful, purposeful odyssey. Thank you, Melissa. But I'm going to give everybody a sneak preview of where we're going and tell them to buckle their seatbelts and stay with us, because while this is as simple enough that children can learn it, I totally agree with Melissa's comment that it's robust and powerful. And I think you'll see today, as Melissa teaches us about the tool, the process that Open the Front Door, the acronym, is based on. And then she and Renee are going to actually demo it live kind of with us today, how this process tool can be used. I'm just very grateful. I hope that you saw with the announcements, and it will be associated with the call report, Melissa has generously shared with us an excerpt from her book, In the Company of Family, How to Thrive When Business is Personal. The excerpt that she shared with us from the book is, we've had a previous webinar with Melissa, at least one. This, I think, is the second kind of in a series where we're unpacking a lot of the concepts and power of that book. But I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It is a great book. And I'm so grateful for Melissa's generosity in sharing this chapter excerpt with us. That's chapter 9, the visible versus invisible. There's a, the purposeful quote you shared. That poem is very, very cute, very good, very powerful. But there's a quote that starts at the top of the chapter heading that I think kind of sums up the importance of what we're going to be talking about today. And it is, silence is indifference and passivity is a thief. And Melissa starts this chapter out with the story of Paul Jr. I suspect the names have been changed to protect the innocent and guilty, as the case may be. But I think this is a real life experience from Melissa's practice. And it really does, I think, it's a great place to start the chapter. I'm wondering, Melissa, if you could maybe share that Paul Jr. story, the story with the client that you spoke to, the mother wife also speaks to this, but maybe you could help us through these stories, then introduce the acronym, explain that, and then take us into what you and Renee want to do. I'm going to actually shut my camera down at this point. I'll stay on for the audio and participate, but I don't want to be visible and detract from you. I want everybody to see you, Melissa. So why don't you take it away?
Okay. Thank you, John A. So as a quick overview, again, you have the entire chapter 9 from my book, in which I teach this tool. But if every chapter, focuses on a case study, and as John A. shared, this one was about Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. Paul Sr. gave some critical feedback to Paul Jr. in front of employees, and kind of like my other client, the husband and wife, Paul Jr. felt very hurt. He felt disrespected because Paul Sr., his father, had corrected him in front of employees, and he knew that Paul Sr. would never do that with another employee. So he felt treated like a child. He felt very disrespected. He felt very hurt. And kind of like my female client, he kept thinking, my dad's going to come back to me. He's going to realize what he did, and he's going to come back to me and apologize, and we're going to be able to talk about it. But time passed and he didn't. So working with Paul to make his boundary visible, his request that his father not treat him that way and speak to him that way in front of fellow employees, I walk through Paul's open the front door process in that book. Again, to get clarity of his experience and to be able to communicate clearly to his father what that request was. And Renee has graciously volunteered to be a live, participant going through this process with us today. And I hope the power of the process will become more clear with that. But first, without any further ado, let me tell you what Open the Front Door is all about. It is a mnemonic. Open the Front Door, OTFD, a learning tool to help us remember that to make our boundaries clear, our communication effective, to help us with self-awareness, to even know what's going on, it's helpful to identify 4 parts. O from open is observations, T, thoughts, F, feelings, and D, desire. And I'll go through that somewhat quickly, somewhat briefly, because I want Renee and I to have as much time as we need for this, and then we'll open it up. Somebody else may want to be a participant, and definitely have time for your questions. So observations, thoughts, feelings, desires. Again, Learning Forum teaches this to school-age children. It's simple enough to grasp that, but what exactly does that mean? Well, it's helpful to start a conversation, especially if it's going to be, like a difficult, challenging conversation, a conversation in which you think that you and the other party may have a difference of opinion or a difference of recall. It's great to start that conversation with observations, observable facts, things that there's no interpretation, like our purposeful poem, there's no interpretation about it. So who, what, when, where, definitely not why, maybe some how, just observable facts. If there were a fly on the wall, a neutral third party observer, what would they see that happened? An example, last Tuesday evening, we met after work to have a conversation, and both of us over time started to raise the volume of our voice. Pretty observable facts. Something that gives the person that you're talking to, that you're starting this conversation with, probably the opportunity to say yes. And I think anytime we're in a disagreement with somebody, the more yeses, yes, that's exactly what happened. Yes, I agree with that. Yes, I experienced that. The more yeses we can get, the more of a foundation and some of that relational equity we have to build on to help us navigate the no's and the maybes. I didn't see it that way. I didn't experience it that way. That's not exactly what I want. So the observations give us a chance to start strong with some yeses. You are right. I agree with you. That is exactly what happened. And that's a nice foundation to start from. But then we know that you and the other party, you may agree, and hopefully you will agree on all of those observable facts, but you had a different experience in there, and that is important. That is relevant. But like our poem, let's differentiate between the two, the observations and your experience of it. And your experience of it can come in two parts. The first, I love Brene Brown, the story I tell myself. When we met last Tuesday evening and over time, the volume of our voices started to get higher, what was the story that I told myself? How did I interpret that? What did I think that meant? Very important information, because again, people can experience the same facts very differently. And then the feelings that came from that. Someone can have the same experience the same facts, those observations, have even the same thoughts maybe, but have some different emotions around it. So the emotional experience is very important to include as well. And you and I both tend to talk sometimes like feelings are paragraphs, sentences. I feel like blah, 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 blah. And that is a felt sense, of what we experience. But what is very important in here is for the feelings portion of open the front door to be genuine feelings, AKA emotions. Those things that are typically one word, happy, mad, sad, afraid, And actually for clients who have a hard time tapping into what exactly did you feel, I will encourage them, start with those basic four, mad, glad, sad, and afraid. And then, try to get more granular. Because those of us who are familiar with the research know actually a couple of things. First, the emotion granularity research, the more specific we can be about the emotion that we experience, the better able we are to respond to it, and even others. So if I say, when that happened, I thought this and I felt angry, that tells you something. But is that anger irritation, or is that anger, I felt irate? Very different. So for you, or maybe your clients who have a hard time identifying what exactly was that emotion that you experienced, maybe start with those four, mad, glad, sad, and afraid, but then really expand upon that to get more specific. And another important reason to name your emotions is more research. This says if we are able to name our emotions, the intensity, or when we name an emotion, typically the intensity of that emotion goes down. So if I'm going into a tense conversation, I feel anxious about it, maybe I still feel hurt or feel angry about it, I can say, I felt hurt. I felt irate even. I'm making myself very clear without having to act out that emotion, kind of put it on display so you can interpret from my behaviors just how angry I was. If I tell you I felt irate, I was irate. And I don't have to act it out, and that can help me to stay more emotionally regulated. So observations are really kind of our black and white. Again, you want a neutral third party, a fly on the wall, to be able to say yes, and the person that you're talking to say yes, that's exactly what happened. How you experienced it is kind of the gray. You'll have different experiences, different thoughts related to those same black and white observable facts. And then feelings. When you put that in there, it adds the color. Because again, if I say last Tuesday when we talked, I felt irritated, that is a very different picture, recall, understanding than if I say last Tuesday night when we talked, I was livid. This adds the punch of color. And then if I have told you my observations and my thoughts and my feelings, too often, too many of us assume the person I'm talking to is going to know what I want, but they're going to give it to me. So often we go around and around and around and around in conversation because we have not asked for what we want. And we have not listened to hear if the person we ask for what we want says yes, no, maybe, how about this instead? We just assume, here's what happened, here's how I feel about it, here's what I think, and there you go. So often conflict remains unresolved because we don't ask for what we want. And sometimes, like the female client I said earlier, we don't even know what we want. So how can the person we're talking to? So desire, what do I want? It could be as simple as, I just wanted you to know. It could be, can we talk about this? I'd like to hear how you experience this. It could be something specific, very specific, like next time, would you mind doing this? Or would you agree to why? But make it specific, because if you just leave observations, thoughts, feelings out there, again, it's not visible, it's not clear. They've got to interpret, and maybe they'll interpret correctly, but there's a big chance that they won't. And so for your benefit to have a chance to be understood, for their benefit to have a chance to understand you, and for the two of you to have the benefit to try to reach some agreement, resolution, next step, make explicit what you want. And Johnny, I'm going to add one more thing and then I'll turn it back over, come back to you. So that is a tool, observations, thoughts, feelings, and desires. And again, it's helpful when you're actually communicating to start in your delivery with observations. That's that neutral, foundation where you can agree and start to unpack the rest from. But oftentimes to get there, to prepare to initiate that conversation, begin with the end in mind. As Stephen Covey says, what do you want? And then work backwards. I was talking to a successor the other day. In January, she's going to buy the business from her dad, and her feelings, her experience of it, it has started to feel adversarial. And she had some specific things that had happened, that led her to feel that way, that she wanted to talk to him about. But she first wanted to talk about the emotional impact and then kind of get back into some of the contract agreement details. And so I told her, okay, so you have multiple desires, slice it thin and just start, with one desire, the first desire, and then what you share, the observations, thoughts, feelings. It's not everything, but share that slice of observations, thoughts, and feelings that go with that first desire, and leave the rest for later. And some of them may, carry over. So again, in the self-awareness, in the practice preparation, it's often helpful to start with, you may just kind of process through it, but start with desire as you prepare to deliver that request. Open the front door to that conversation with the other person. Start with the end in mind. So Johnny, I know you're fighting to keep your voice, so I just want to head through that whole outline, but I want to pause and invite questions or comments from you.
Okay, I appreciate that, Melissa. I'm gonna, I think that was excellent. I'm gonna back up just a bit. I think if I remember correctly, and how time is racing and dims our memory, but I believe when we talked about your book earlier, we really focused on the importance of boundaries. And I know that's an issue that I struggle with personally. It's very difficult for me to set boundaries, but in the first kind of couple of pages of chapter 9, you make a point that really struck me powerfully when I read it for the second time. And that was that even dogs are, we had an invisible fence in our previous home, and we trained our dog with a shock collar to try to avoid her just innocently triggering that invisible fence and getting shocked. And she quickly learned what the boundaries were, even though they weren't visible. And I think part of what this chapter really speaks to is a methodology for helping to let others know what our boundaries are and the importance of that. So I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore before you and Renee jump into the demonstration you're going to share with us, but I do think that we often feel we're victims because people trample on our boundaries, but in reality, they're invisible. They have no idea, and we've done nothing to let them know that there are boundaries that they're stepping over.
Yeah. We teach people how to treat us. And that can happen in a couple different ways. That can happen if they're invisible boundaries by kind of zapping them like a dog that crosses an invisible fence. We can zap them. There can be a negative consequence when somebody crosses our boundaries. And that'll teach people over time. But it can be hard on them, and it can be hard on us to only reinforce our boundaries when people have already violated them. So it's better, and this is where the chapter gets in, visible versus invisible, to make our boundaries visible. And one of the ways that we do that is to communicate them, to express them, to ask for what we want, to just be explicit. And again, that's how this communication tool ties into that. But we absolutely do teach people how to treat us. And if we are so humane with dogs, when we put in an invisible fence, we put up little flags to teach them. Might we do the same to family and friends and coworkers and make our boundaries visible so they know where they are? They have a chance to honor and respect them, ask us about them, whatever it is, instead of simply waiting until our boundaries are crossed and then zapping them, which again, teaches, but it's hard on them and it's hard on us. But thanks, Johnny, for that tie-in. I would love, without any further ado, yeah.
Before you go on, there is a timely comment in the chat that I wanted to make you and Renee aware of. Clea Harris, who you and Clea ought to get together sometime. You would have so much in common. Clea said, I assume there is a weave of the OTF communication between the two parties before you get to sharing desires.
It's a good question, and it could be that, but it doesn't have to be. And maybe I'm not an all or nothing person. Typically how I do it is preparing people to start a conversation. So it's kind of like another play on the open the front door to a conversation. Don't tell them everything you have to tell them, about whatever this desire is or this experience is. But, again, kind of slice it thin to open the conversation with sharing your experience and making your request, and then inviting them into a dialogue. That's typically how I teach it, because it's easier, to focus on one person having a chance to speak and be understood. Again, not everything you have to say on the topic, but let's slice it thin and take turns. That's typically how I teach it. But I'm not much of an all or nothing sort of person. I think it's easier to try to understand one side and versus the other. So I can't say that I have overtly tried it in that way before, but it'd be interesting. And if Clea, you experiment with that, I'd be curious to hear how it works. Thank you, John A. I have not been able to monitor the chat questions. So if there's anything else that you think we want to get to before we get to Renee, please let me know.
Okay, no, that's it. And that's what Julie and I are here to do. So thank you. Why don't you and Renee proceed?
Awesome. All right. Well, Renee is a very faithful participant in the Tuesdays webinar, but if I'm correct, she has not yet been a thought leader herself. So Renee, that invitation is definitely out there. We would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, thank you for being this willing participant to come and share with us. I'm gonna pin you so I can see you well. Renee has picked a real a real experience, a real family dynamic, a real couple dynamic that she has experienced. And we have identified it, but we have not practiced it. We have not scripted. So this is going to be live of Renee practicing using this tool with the situation with her husband. So I appreciate your being here to do this and demonstrate the play along. Give us a summary, a brief summary of the topic, the experience.
Yeah. So first, kudos to this community that I would feel comfortable sharing my real life example. And the trust that's here, that it's all taken in the right spirit and such. So my challenge is how to apply this in interactions with my spouse. We've been married 34 years. We have 3 young adult daughters. And we have a good marriage. Love is expressed regularly, lots of positive interactions and such. But here's my one sticking point. And so using what I've learned about open the front door already, if Melissa were to ask, what's my desire? So my desire would be that when situations arise where my husband gets stressed, frustrated, irritated, angry, and for 34 plus years, he's had a very intense way of doing this that I don't like. And interestingly enough, so I said my purposeful journey has been focused on applying what I learned to family first. Our 3 young adult daughters don't like it either. And it's interesting, I don't know if we've all adapted in our own ways, not necessarily, it sounds like the most constructive way. So when he gets angry, his tone of voice, so my observation would be, he gets really loud, he's irritated, there's generalizations, and it's really unpleasant. And it can happen over small things, at least from my perspective, small things, or some important decisions. So that's the situation, and it's been happening consistently for 34 years. And I was telling Melissa, I said, I guess if there's a tool that I don't have to experience this for another 30 some years, that would be great. So here I am.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. And it is great that we have such a community that we can come with real stuff like this and explore it together. So let's start with the end in mind, which you did a little bit, but make it very clear for us. What is anticipating this will be a conversation with your husband, Gary. What is the desire? What are you wanting to ask of him?
So I know I would want the intensity brought down, and the intensity being measured by the increased volume in his voice and the increased emphasis in the voice and the overgeneralizations that come from, that are also incorporated into his reaction.
Okay.
So I'd want that to stop.
Okay. So fairly specific. Let's start with that and go back to the beginning. So if you were to open the front door to this conversation with Gary, and to start with those neutral, observations: who, what, when, where, how, maybe. How would you to get him kind of like to what you're imagining, what you're recalling, this conversation that you want to have? What would those observations be?
When I do something or say something that frustrates you, your voice gets louder, and you overgeneralize, in my opinion, why that's occurred.
Okay. So a couple of pieces of feedback. You said, when you get frustrated at me, which Gary may or may not have said, I'm frustrated with you. So that could be an interpretation, that could be a thought.
Mhm.
And overgeneralizing, again, sounds to me like it's your interpretation, your evaluation of what he's done. So teasing that out to a part of your experience, it seems like he's frustrated with you. It seems like there's some overgeneralization, and definitely being
Sure.
explicit, to give an example. But I wonder, it could be to make it really crystal clear with the observations, if you can even identify a specific recent
Sure.
occurrence could help him, because this is really vivid in your mind, not just the
Right.
last time, but the last 34 years of times,
Sure.
really vivid in your mind, but maybe not to Gary's. His experience is different than yours. So if you could, I'll change it up a little bit and say, think about a recent time where this
Right.
happened, and try to be news reporter, fly on the wall,
Sure.
just sharing observable facts, no interpretation.
Okay, so there's two things that happened on Sunday. One with me, and one I observed with one of our daughters who was over. So one's going to sound silly, the one with me, but we were making.
For simplicity, I'll interrupt you. For simplicity, pick one.
Okay, pick one.
Yeah.
I think so if I were to pick one, Melissa, the one with our daughter would impact family dynamics. And so I'll describe it. I'll start with that one. And because my daughter and I talked afterwards, like, how do we manage him differently? Because so here's what happened. So she wants to refinance, or she's considering refinancing her mortgage. And it came down to the closing documents. And his response was, why am I just now seeing this? Why don't you talk to me? He's saying this to her, but I'm observing it. Why don't you talk to me about these things? And just trying to get to a point about the payment. And as I'm observing it, it was a language description difference. So, basically what it needed to be is she needed to describe principal and interest payment, not the total, but that wasn't what he was asking for. And it was going on for a while. So there's a little bit of a triad here, because then when I tried to interrupt to point out that was what was missing, it was a common phrase that's used in these situations is, stop interrupting me, let me finish. And so that would be an observation. And so in that situation, it became more intense that either I was comfortable with, or my daughter, on a Sunday morning when someone's just asking for input. So to the point that afterwards, because another phrase would be, because she did share the information in advance and did talk about it, but he either didn't recall or it wasn't fitting, the situation. So that would be one. A simpler one, because you said for simplicity, pick one, is
let's start there.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's start there. And since I'm going to provide a suggestion, since you're the one who's going to be having this conversation, you've talked to your daughter, so you know what her experience is like, but you're the one talking to Gary about this.
Sure.
Sharing just your part, focusing on your interaction with him to keep it more simple. And again, open the door to a multifaceted, possibly, conversation, but just get the conversation started.
Okay.
So the observations about your role, your participation in this process, what were they?
So my role was, I was listening to this discussion, observe, and could tell that they were miscommunicating. So I noticed a point of clarification.
What did you see? What did you observe that you knew they were miscommunicating? Because that's an interpretation.
Right. So, because they were both saying the same thing over and over again, neither understanding neither getting our daughter was saying the same thing over and over. And my husband, Gary, was saying the same thing, and they weren't getting to where they needed to be, which was, being able to figure out the difference in the payment, just the principal and interest payment.
Yep. Which daughter is this?
Our oldest. Yeah.
Okay.
Kenna.
Yeah.
Oh, name Kenna. Yeah.
If you feel like sharing a name.
Sure.
So an observation is, on Sunday morning, when our oldest daughter was over, the two of you were talking about the mortgage payment, and I saw, I heard each of you continuing to pretty much say the same thing. And it seemed to me, you can, kind of venture over into the thoughts. It seemed to me like you were having some difficulty in conversation. And for our time, I'm going to kind of speed up. And I noticed that the volume of the voices got louder, and some of the intensity of the words, was stronger. So I kind of ventured over into a little bit of thoughts, and then I came right back to fly on the wall, things that a neutral third party would see. Hopefully, so Gary says, yes, oldest daughter, Sunday morning, we were kind of saying the same thing back and forth. Hopefully he can say, yes, 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 that is what happened. And it forms a nice, foundation for going forward. And then maybe that moment before you tried to help, you interjected. What were you thinking and feeling?
So I was thinking that here we go again. She wants and needs his help, but it's an unpleasant. It's not a easy experience, and I could observe that she was trying not to react, because in the past she would have just packed up her stuff and left. So
Yeah.
she stuck it out. Yeah. So
Yeah.
she stuck it out. And so, but I was thinking that this is harder than it needs to be.
Mm. And what emotions were you feeling?
It makes me wary, because I know from experience it could escalate to, both parties being angry and leaving, leaving upset, but also sad, because she's asking for help, but it's so difficult to do, or at least from my point of view, it seemed like it was difficult to do so.
Yeah. So as you're observing this interaction between them, your daughter and your husband, you feel sad because you can tell she's staying in this. She really wants some feedback. And you could tell that Gary was trying to help his daughter because he's asking her questions and trying to give her information. And you felt sad because it seemed like they wanted to benefit from each other, but they weren't.
Right.
And that's what led you to try to intervene. But if we go back, tying this back to the desire, remind us of what that is again.
So the desire would be less intense interactions. I guess, is that how I expressed it earlier?
Well, it's not clear. What does that mean? Less intense interactions, to really serve us up with great specificity and clarity for Gary. What is that you were asking that he might work on?
So a calmer, slower pace in these types of conversations.
So if I'm going to pretend I'm Gary, he may be, I was calm. So something that is real objective, slower. Yeah, a slower pace of conversation. You talked earlier about kind of the intensity, some of the intensity at which some of the words are expressed. With this desire, you want to make it really clear. Because again, if you say, Gary, I just want you to be more calm in these situations, he could be like, I was perfectly calm. Right. And it's like, oh, all right, we lost. Let's try that again. But if you say, it would mean so much to me if you could be intentional to watch the volume of your voice and the pace at which, y'all are kind of going back and forth. I think that could make such a difference.
Right.
More specific, more concrete, less subjective.
I appreciate that. That sounds great.
Now, he may say yes, he may say no. It could go any number of directions. But if you start out, and just for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of play it back. Sunday morning when our eldest was over here, asking you about the mortgage, I was in the kitchen or whatever. I was listening, and I noticed that the pace of words back and forth got faster, and there was a raise in volume of the voices, and some of the words had an intensity behind them. And as I'm listening in, that's observation, and as I'm listening in, I'm feeling sad and weary, because I think, wow, she really wants her dad's input. And Gary, I can tell that you want to help our daughter, but I felt like y'all were just going in circles. And so I've noticed, you didn't say this in this conversation so much, but and I've noticed this can be a pattern sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So would you be open to, more specific feedback, or would you be open to, being intentional to watch the volume? That's vague. Would you be open to, being intentional to, with the volume of your voice, the intensity behind some of your words, being really specific of what you're asking him? And this is a little bit different variation. It could be, that was my experience. Your desire could be, that was my experience. I'm curious, could you tell me what that was like for you? So sometimes, when it's something like this, that Gary may understandably have a very different experience. Well, that's just how I talk. I'm passionate about helping her get to resolution. He may not mean it all to be offensive or hurtful or destructive, in how he's doing it. So if we give him the benefit of the doubt that this is not ineffective intentionally,
right?
A desire for first place to start could even be, could you tell me, your experience of that? Would you tell me what that's like for you? Would you be open to understanding more of what it's like for us to be on the receiving end of that? And again, slicing things thin is never a bad idea, but being specific with what that desire is and setting it up, observations, thoughts, feelings to tee up to that desire.
I agree. So thank you, Melissa, because what you said about slicing it thin and when you transition from I feel sad and weary, would you be willing to watch the volume of your voice and the pace of your voice? Even that would make a difference. So, and then depending on how that went, being able to come back and take another slice. So very, very, very helpful and immediately applicable. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you think that may even be too big of a slice to start with, your first desire could be, would you be open to some feedback? Or would you be open to hearing about my experience when you and our eldest were talking on Sunday? She came over, she was asking some questions. I'm feeling sad as I'm listening because I think y'all are going around, it seems like y'all are going around in circles. Would you be open to hearing more of my thoughts about that? You could slice it even thinner.
Yeah, perfect.
And that gets into timing, because timing of these conversations is important too. Not only how, prepared are you and ready to have that conversation, but the recipient. So a nice thin slice can even be sometimes, is this a good time to talk about this? Can we talk about this now? Or can we plan a time to talk about this? Are you open to hearing my experience? Something really nice and thin can be an initial desire to start with.
Absolutely perfect. So applicable. And easy. And like you said, I appreciate you said share the school children learn it, because that was what I was thinking.
School children can learn it, but
Yeah,
you know,
well, if they can, I can.
well,
And yeah, so
it's the practice, you know, because it's
yeah.
simple enough to learn doesn't mean it's simplistic to apply. So thank you for being our live, you know, practice-y, if that's even a word today, so folks can kind of see this process in action. I really appreciate it. And with our couple of minutes left, Julie, if you will remind folks who have questions or comments, we want to have a chance to answer them as well.
Great, thanks, Melissa. If anyone has a question or comment you'd like to share, you can submit that via the Q&A or chat, or you can also raise your hand and we will open your line. And Melissa, it does look like we have one question in the Q&A.
Okay.
And that's
from Emily.
Okay, yep, I'll let you take that.
Let's see, can you speak to how to move if the person you are giving this feedback to gets defensive and begins to exhibit the same behaviors in that moment? Yes. So actually, we kind of did that with Renee and Gary. If you anticipate, so you could always back into this and say, I'm sorry, you know, maybe I got ahead of myself. Can we start over? You know, is now even a good time to have this conversation? You know, would you be open to some feedback? So we can backpedal if we need to, but even better, Emily, if we know this is something they may totally disagree with us on, they may have had a different experience or they haven't responded well to feedback about this before. Really that practice of slicing it very thin to, again, have thought through, you know, your different layers of what you want to talk about, but to start really thin of, you know, would you be open to hearing some thoughts on this? Would you be open to knowing my experience? Would you, would you, be in your desire first so that, you know, if it's a good time, they're in a good space, they're open to feedback. And again, just kind of taking it very slowly, a little bit at a time. It's not about saying every thought and feeling and desire that you have, but if you can, anytime you can get a yes, again, with observations, if you can get a yes, we're in agreement there, that creates more relational equity. Anytime you can go through one of these slices and you get like a, okay, yes, and then move to the next one, you're building strength that can support the process going forward. So Emily, thank you for that question. And I see Rachel, so I understand this. Yep, so Rachel's question is, what if, so she understands for this tool to happen, at least one person needs to be willing. What if someone's not even ready to have a conversation? How can you overcome that? And so when you're getting that desire of, would you be open to hearing my experience? Can we have a conversation about this? They may well say no. And I'm very much a proponent of people have a right to tell you no, even people who love you. And we want to respect the no of others. It's a measure of the quality of the relationship. But then, so then you have a modified request. Okay, I respect that no. Okay, I understand now is not a good time. This is really important to me, and I think it's really important to us. It's coming to agreement of, a next step. Okay, not now. How about a next time? When can we schedule that? Coming in, seeing if you can come to some sort of agreement for them as a next step. And that next step could be, well, what if you go first? I want to hear, your experience too. So what if it's not me, sharing my experience first? What if, could you just share your thoughts or your experience with that with me? Looking for a way to get a yes, that agreement, because then you can build from there. And Rita, your question reminded me, I don't see any more Q&As, so I'm going to jump ahead real quick.
Melissa,
Yep.
there are a couple of comments in chat. One that's pretty related to where you just were from Clea. She asked, do you ask permission to have this discussion with someone that can be considered critical?
Mm-hmm. I love permission, because you want it to be a good time for them. You want them to be in a mindset. You want them to be in an emotional space where they have willingness to have a conversation with you. So I'm very much about asking permission to share, asking invitation into a conversation, because I think that has a good chance of helping to set it up for success.
And Boone Eck had an interesting comment. He says, this reminds me of PPP, permission, prostration, and potency. That I've not heard of the PPP, that acronym, Boone, but if you want to raise your hand, maybe you could share that with us. And Paul Edelman asked, what would a Bowen trained advisor say is happening in this situation? And then there was a final affirming hug from Carol Foley, who said, well done, ladies. Thanks for your bravery and vulnerability, Renee. But how would you respond to Paul on the what would a Bowen trained advisor say in this situation?
Oh, I am not able to think that fast. I would invite Paul to share his thoughts, because I know that's something that he's been growing in and he's passionate about. Paul, what would you say?
Julie, could you open Paul's mic?
Paul, I've opened your line on our end.
Oh, so the thing that stuck in my mind was Renee mentioned that her husband was saying something like he was upset because the daughter had waited till the time of the closing to involve him in these deliberations. So I wondered if there was some validity to his point. Was he ending up sort of the odd man out in a triangle?
That's a great question. And my daughter and I talked about that afterwards. This could actually, when we talk about the thin slices, leads to another slice, but she did discuss this with him, that this was going on in advance, and had sent information. But what another standard response that he will have is, well, I didn't see it. I didn't, whether it's get the email or get the text or whatever, or I don't remember having that conversation. To the point, she's a nurse practitioner. I said, well, what do you do with your patients? Like, is this a sign of cognitive decline or something? Because it's, happening. Anyways, just like, I don't know. So that would be another slice to use this in, because it happens not only with me, but with our daughters, where we'd have to share that observation about, we know we have given him information in advance, or it was discussed before, but he is adamant that we didn't give it to him or we didn't discuss it. So that'll be another slice that we'll take down the road. So I don't know what Bowen would say about that, but.
Well, it sounds like he's on the outside here. Maybe he's put himself in that position. It's hard to say, but he's saying, I'm not seeing this information. Well, maybe he's warding it off. But
Right.
somehow the system is unbalanced, where it seems like the mother and the daughter are connected, and the spouse, the husband, is off on his own.
From his point of view, yeah. So good observation to share. So I'll check in on that too. So.
And you can empathize with his experience. So his experience is, I'm angry and frustrated because she didn't send it to me sooner. And you know that she did, but that's his experience. I get it. That's frustrating because you don't think she's reached out to you sooner. I actually know that she did, because I was copied on that same email, but I get it. You're busy, you didn't see it, and you're frustrated because you think she's springing this on you in the last minute. An opportunity to empathize with what you are hearing, his thoughts and his feelings are, is great. You may think, that's not valid because she did send it to you, but his experience is he didn't see it, so it's as if she didn't, and he's having this emotional reaction around it. Empathize with that. And again, that can be another, yes, you get it. That's why I was so frustrated. That's why I say angry. She just asked me sooner. I get it. Anytime you can get a yes where you're in agreement, even when it's giving people empathy, it's giving people the benefit of the doubt, it's more to build on towards agreement, resolution, whatever. Thanks, Paul. So I want to, there's a survey up for you now to give us some feedback on today. I want to share with you. So I first learned about Open the Front Door in 2003 and never heard anything about it or anything similar until our a PPI book club that a number of us are a part of started to read this book, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, that I read the purposeful poem from. He has a very similar process. And one of the interesting things that he really teaches on is it's not just about communication. He teaches it as a communication tool, but he time and time again teaches it and gives examples of using it as a listening tool. And Renee's in the book club. I'll tell you, we've all found it profound and very valuable. Listening for needs, listening for feelings, and paraphrasing that back to people can again be another way to kind of get on the same page and build that empathy, build that consensus to navigate difficult conversations. So I very much recommend this book, Nonviolent Communication. Not a fan of the title because I think it underscores it, but it's really about compassionate communication and being a compassionate learner. So I very much recommend that to learn more about a very similar tool. And Renee, again, thank you for helping us see that this process is simple, but not necessarily simplistic. It can take some practice, but help, I think, for you to get some self-awareness, clarity, and prepare for some different slices of communication that you could have with Gary. And for all of our live participants today, we thank you for being here. Julie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Renee. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We do